Let the darkness settle around you. There are 3 versions of how Merlin died. In one, he's sealed alive in a crystal cave by the woman he loved, able to see and hear everything, but unable to move or speak for eternity. In another, he's transformed into a tree, his consciousness trapped in wood and bark, feeling every axe that cuts nearby, every season that passes, aware but immobile, silent but screaming. In the third, he simply vanished, walked into the forest one day and was never seen again. Some say he's still out there, still watching, still waiting, still trying to warn us about disasters we refuse to prevent. But here's the thing, Merlin never lived, and he never died, because Merlin is not one man. He's 5 different men across 5 different centuries, merged together by medieval writers who needed a wizard to explain the impossible. Tonight, I'm going to tell you 3 stories, 3 different Merlins. First, the Madman, a Welsh prophet who watched his friends slaughtered in battle, went insane with grief and guilt, and spent 40 years living in the Scottish forest, talking to a pig and eating apples while predicting the apocalypse. This is Myrddin Wyllt, the wild man of Camelot. His story comes from Welsh poems written down in the 9th through 12th centuries, supposedly about events in 573 AD. Second, the monster, the half-demon child who orchestrated a king's conception through magical deception, stole the baby, and engineered an entire kingdom to serve his unknowable purposes. This is Merlinus, the creation of Geoffrey of Monmouth in 1136 and Robert de Boron in 1200. This is Merlin as medieval propaganda, a wizard invented to justify conquest and legitimize power. Third, the Fool, the greatest wizard in history, who taught a woman everything he knew, fell in love with her, and was sealed away forever by his own student in the ultimate betrayal. This is the Merlin of the Vulgate cycle from the 1200s and Thomas Malory's Le Morte d'Arthur from 1485. This is Merlin as tragedy, the prophet who could see everything coming but couldn't stop any of it. One is a story about trauma and madness. One is about control and prophecy. One is about power and its price. And all 3 are supposedly the same person. I'm not going to tell you which version is real, because none of them are real. Merlin is a 900-year-old game of telephone played by medieval monks, French poets, and English prisoners. Each generation rewrote him to serve their own purposes, to justify their wars, to explain their kings, to make sense of their fears. But what we're going to do tonight is tell you these 3 stories the way they were meant to be told. Dark, disturbing, and devastating. And then we'll show you why each generation needed their own version of the wizard who could see everything coming but couldn't stop any of it. We're going to show you how a traumatized Welsh bard became a demon's son, became a tragic fool. How history became legend, became propaganda, became myth. How the truth got buried under 900 years of rewrites until nobody remembers what was real anymore. And we're going to ask the question that nobody wants to answer. Was Merlin ever the hero, or was he always the monster, and we just kept rewriting him until we could pretend otherwise? Before we enter the forest, before we descend into the crystal cave, before we meet the madman and the monster and the fool, I want to ask you something. If you believe these dark legends are worth exploring, if you believe these evolving myths tell us something true about power and knowledge and the price of seeing too much, if you believe the stories we keep rewriting reveal more about us than about the past, then help us continue this work. Like this video, subscribe to the Midnight Archives. Your support keeps the candle lit while we chase these shadows through history, while we dig up the stories they tried to bury, while we ask the questions they don't want answered. Now, let's meet the madman first, the one who saw too much and couldn't bear it, the one who ran into the forest and never came back, the one who ate apples and talked to animals and predicted the end of the world, the one who might be the only honest version of Merlin we have because he admits what the others won't, that knowing the future doesn't give you power, it just gives you front row seats to watch everything fall apart. Welcome to the Midnight Archives. Before we begin, you need to understand what we're dealing with here. The story of Myrddin Wyllt, Myrddin the Wild, comes from Welsh poems that were written down somewhere between the 9th and 12th centuries. That's 300 to 600 years after the events they describe supposedly happened. The poems have names like Afalano, which means the apple trees, and Oyano, the greetings, and Ymdidyn Myrddin a Taliesin, the dialogue of Myrddin and Taliesin. These poems claim to record the words of a 6th century prophet, but we have no way of knowing if they're based on a real person or if Myrddin was already legendary when these poems were composed. What we do know is this: the Battle of Arfderydd actually happened. It's mentioned in the Welsh annals as occurring in 573 AD. It was a battle between British kingdoms in what's now southern Scotland. Everything else, what happened to Myrddin, why he went mad, what he said in the forest, that's legend. That's the story people told to explain trauma, to make sense of madness, to give meaning to suffering. So when I tell you this story, understand, I'm not telling you history. I'm telling you what people 1,400 years ago believed about a man who went into the forest and never came back. Now, let's meet him. Myrddin was not a wizard. Let's be very clear about that from the start. In the original Welsh poems, he's never called a wizard. He doesn't cast spells. He doesn't transform into animals or fly through the air or summon demons. He's a bard, a poet, a keeper of histories and singer of songs. In the 6th century, in the fractured kingdoms of post-Roman Britain, bards were important people. They weren't just entertainers. They were the memory of the tribe. They remembered genealogies, recorded victories, commemorated the dead. They were the ones who decided what would be remembered and what would be forgotten. Myrddin served King Gwendola in the kingdom of what's now southern Scotland and northern England. The poems say he was renowned, that kings from other territories would invite him to their halls to hear him sing, that his memory was perfect and his voice could make warriors weep. He was, in other words, successful, respected, at the height of his powers. And then came Arfderydd. The year was 573 AD. Rome had fallen more than a century before. Britain was no longer a province of empire. It was dozens of small kingdoms, each ruled by a chieftain or petty king, each fighting the others for land, for resources, for survival. The Saxons were pushing in from the east, the Irish from the west, the Picts from the north, and the British kingdoms, the descendants of Rome, were too busy fighting each other to present a united defense. Arfderydd started as a gathering, multiple kings meeting to negotiate, to form alliances, to try to organize some kind of resistance against the invasions. It ended as a massacre. The poems don't tell us exactly what went wrong, just that the talking turned to shouting, the shouting turned to swords, and suddenly thousands of men were killing each other in a field in southern Scotland. King against king, brother against brother, army against army. The poems say the battle lasted 3 days, that the bodies piled so high you couldn't see the ground, that the rivers ran red, that the crows came in such numbers they blocked out the sun. This might be exaggeration, poetic embellishment, but the Welsh annals confirm this much. Arfderydd was devastating, a turning point, a disaster from which the British kingdoms never fully recovered. And somewhere in that chaos, Myrddin watched his king die. The poems are specific about this. Myrddin didn't fight. He was a bard, not a warrior. He watched from a distance as King Gwyndolw fell, as his king's warriors were cut down, as his friends, men he'd known since childhood, men he'd sung about in his poems, were reduced to screaming, bleeding bodies in the mud. And then something happened. Something the poems describe but don't explain. Myrddin looked up at the sky, and he saw something. What did he see? The poems won't tell us. They just say he looked up and screamed and ran. He dropped his harp, abandoned his position, and ran from the battlefield. He ran north, into the Caledonian forest, the great wild wood that covered southern Scotland. Miles and miles of ancient trees, dark valleys, wild animals, no roads, no villages, no humans. He ran into the wilderness, and he didn't come back. For 40 years, the greatest bard in Britain lived as a wild man in the forest. The poems describe him in detail. And it's not pretty. His clothes rotted off his body. His hair grew long and matted. His beard tangled with leaves and dirt. His skin darkened from sun and filth. His nails grew into claws. He lived on whatever he could find: berries, roots, raw fish from streams, and apples. Always apples. The poems are obsessed with apples. There's an entire poem called The Apple Trees, where Myrddin addresses an apple tree like it's a person, like it's the only friend he has left. "Sweet apple tree that grows in the clearing," he says, "I prophesy before the lords of Maelgwn that on Saturday there will be a battle between Severn and Wye." He's talking to a tree, predicting battles to a plant. This is not the behavior of a wise prophet. This is the behavior of a broken mind trying to impose order on chaos. But here's what's even more disturbing. According to the later records, he was right. The battle he predicted happened, and he predicted dozens more, all of which came true. So what do we have? A madman talking to trees who can somehow see the future? The poems also mention a pig. There was a pig, the poems call it a little pig, that followed Myrddin through the forest. He would have conversations with it. Long, involved conversations about the future of Britain, about kings and battles and invasions yet to come. Was the pig real, or was it a hallucination? The poems don't clarify, they just record what Myrddin said to it. "Little pig, why do you dig?" he asks. "Do you search for the corpses of warriors? The armies are gathering, the Saxons sharpen their swords. I see fire, I see blood, I see Britain falling." This is not wisdom. This is trauma speaking. This is a man who watched thousands die and can't stop seeing it, can't stop predicting more death. can't stop feeling like every moment of peace is just the pause before the next slaughter. Myrddin had a sister. The poems call her Ganeda. She was married to King Rhydderch, one of the kings who survived Arfderydd. After the battle, after Myrddin disappeared, Ganeda spent years trying to find him, trying to bring him back. There's a poem, The Greetings, that records one of her attempts. She finds him deep in the forest. She brings servants with her. They carry clean clothes, food, wine. She's prepared a bath. She's brought musicians to play for him, hoping music might remind him of who he used to be. "Brother," she says, "it's time to come home. The battle is over. The war is done. You have to stop living like this. You have to come back to civilization." And Myrddin looks at her with wild eyes and says, "Civilization? You want me to return to civilization? I watched civilization kill itself at Arfderydd. I watched men of honor become butchers. I watched brothers murder brothers over scraps of land. You call that civilization?" "It's over," Ganeda insists. "That battle is in the past. You have to let it go." "The battle is never over," Myrddin says. "It's still happening. It will always be happening. I close my eyes and I'm still there. I see their faces. I hear them screaming. I smell the blood. The only difference between me and you is that I stopped pretending it didn't happen. So you'll stay here? In the forest, talking to animals and trees. This is your solution?" "The forest doesn't lie," Myrddin says. "The trees don't make promises they can't keep. The animals don't kill each other over who has the right to rule. The forest is honest. It's the world of men that's false." Ganeda tries again. She brings their nephew, Myrddin's sister's son, a young man who's heard stories about his uncle, the famous bard. "Uncle," the young man says, "I want to hear your songs. I want to learn from you. Come back and teach me." Myrddin looks at him and says, "You want to learn? Then learn this. Every king I sang for is dead. Every warrior I praised is rotting in the ground. Every victory I commemorated led to another war. I spent my life turning slaughter into poetry, making murder sound noble. I was very good at it. And every song I sang made more young men want to go to war. So yes, I can teach you. I can teach you how to make death sound beautiful, how to make boys want to die for honor and glory and their king's ambition. Is that what you want to learn?" The nephew leaves. He doesn't come back. But here's the thing that made Myrddin more than just another traumatized veteran who couldn't reintegrate into society. He could see the future, or at least, that's what the poems claim. And the historical records, written centuries later, confirm that many of his predictions came true. He predicted the Saxon conquest of Britain. He predicted the Viking invasions that would come centuries later. He predicted the Norman conquest in 1066, 500 years before it happened. At least, that's what the medieval writers claimed. They put prophecies in his mouth after the events had already occurred, then backdated them to make it seem like Myrddin had seen it all coming. This is how legendary prophets work. They're always right in retrospect, because people write their predictions after they know the outcome. But let's imagine for a moment that the Welsh people in the 6th and 7th centuries genuinely believed Myrddin could see the future, that his trauma had somehow cracked open his mind and given him access to something beyond normal perception. What would that be like? Imagine knowing that everything you valued was going to be destroyed, that your culture would be conquered, that your language would nearly die out, that your children's children's children would live under foreign rule. Imagine seeing all of that and being powerless to prevent it. Imagine trying to warn people and having them dismiss you as crazy. That's Myrddin. That's his curse. He sees disaster coming. He tries to warn people. They call him mad and ignore him. The disaster happens. He's proven right. But being right doesn't save anyone. There's a poem where he addresses the British kings directly. Lords of Britain, why do you feast? Why do you celebrate? I see your halls burning. I see your children enslaved. I see foreign tongues spoken in your courts. Why do you not prepare? Why do you not unite? The enemy is coming. I've seen it. Why will you not listen? And the kings ignore him. Because he's the madman in the forest. Because his hair is full of leaves and he talks to pigs. Because accepting that he's right would mean accepting that everything they're fighting for is doomed. So they dismiss him. And they keep fighting their petty wars. And the Saxons keep advancing. And Britain keeps falling. And Myrddin, in his forest, watches it all happen exactly as he predicted. There's a poem called A Fallen Now, The Apple Trees, that might be the most heartbreaking thing in early Welsh literature. It's Myrddin talking to an apple tree. The entire poem is just him, alone in a clearing, addressing a tree. Sweet apple tree that grows in the clearing, the nobles ignore you because of your anger. I prophesy before Mylddin and his court. He goes on to predict battles, invasions, deaths, the fall of kingdoms, all while talking to a tree. But here's what's implied between the lines. Myrddin is talking to the tree because there's no one else to talk to. The people won't listen. His sister has stopped coming. His king is dead. His friends are dead. Everyone he knew is dead or thinks he's crazy. The apple tree is his only audience, the only thing that will listen to his prophecies without judgment, without dismissal, without trying to make him come back to a world he can no longer bear. And the apples, the fruit, become symbolic. They represent knowledge, the knowledge of what's coming, the burden of seeing the future. In some versions of the legend, the apples are magical. If you eat one of Myrddin's apples, you'll see what he sees. You'll know what's coming. But the poems suggest that nobody wants to eat them. Because who wants to see disaster coming if you can't prevent it? Who wants to carry the burden of knowledge that will only make you helpless and afraid? Myrddin is cursed with those apples. He eats them because he has to eat something. But every apple is another vision, another glimpse of disasters yet to come, another prophecy that no one will believe. He's trapped in a cycle. See the future. Try to warn people. Be dismissed as mad. Watch it happen anyway. See more of the future. Repeat. For 40 years. There's a poem. Scholars debate whether it's part of the original cycle or a later edition that describes Ganieda's final visit to the forest. She's old now. She's buried her husband. She's tired. She spent decades trying to save her brother, and she's finally accepted that she can't. She finds him in his clearing, under his apple tree. He looks ancient, wild, more tree than man. "Brother," she says, "I'm old. I'll be dead soon, and I need to know. All those years ago, at Arfderydd, when you looked up at the sky and screamed and ran, what did you see?" Myrddin is quiet for a long time. Then he says, "I saw it all." Saw what? Everything that was coming, the Saxons, the Vikings, the Normans, the centuries of war, the castles burning, the villages destroyed, the language dying, the old gods forgotten, the forests cut down, The songs lost. I saw Britain fall, and I saw that nothing I could do would stop it. So you ran, Geneida says, because you couldn't bear it. No, Myrddin says, I ran because I could bear it. That was the problem. I could see it all coming, and I knew I would survive to watch it happen. I knew I would live long enough to see every prophecy come true. I knew I would be right about everything, and that being right would save nothing. So you hid. I waited. There's a difference. I wait here for Britain to fall, and then I wait for what comes after, because there's always something after. That's what seeing the future teaches you. That destruction is never final. That something always survives. That something always grows back. The apple trees, Geneida says, understanding. The apple trees, Myrddin confirms. They die every winter, and they come back every spring. Britain will die, but something will grow back. I'm just waiting to see what. Geneida looks at her brother, sees the peace in his eyes, realizes he's not suffering anymore. He's not running anymore. He's accepted his role as the witness, the one who watches, the one who remembers, the one who survives to tell the story. Will you tell me, she asks, what you see coming for me? No, Myrddin says gently. You don't want to know. Trust me. And she leaves him there, under his apple tree, talking to his pig, eating his prophetic fruit, watching the future unfold exactly as he always knew it would. The poems don't tell us how Myrddin died, or if he died at all. Some versions say he eventually died under his apple tree, still muttering prophecies to the forest. Some say he walked deeper into the woods one day and simply vanished, merging with the forest itself, becoming part of the landscape. Some say he's still there, that if you go to the right forest at the right time, you can still hear him, still hear his voice whispering prophecies through the trees, still warning about disasters that are about to happen, and nobody listens, because he's just the wind in the leaves, just a story, just the madman from 1,400 years ago who couldn't cope with what he saw. But here's what the Welsh remembered about Myrddin Wyllt. He wasn't wrong. Everything he predicted came true. The Saxons did conquer, the Vikings did invade, the Normans did take over. The Welsh language nearly died. The forests were cut down. The old ways were forgotten. He saw it all coming, and he was powerless to stop any of it. So he removed himself from the world of men who wouldn't listen, and he spent 40 years in the forest with the only companions who didn't judge him for seeing too much. Trees, animals, apples, prophecies. That's the first Merlin, the honest one, the one who admits that seeing the future doesn't give you power, it just gives you trauma. The one who ran away because staying would have driven him madder than leaving ever did. The one who chose the forest over civilization, because at least the forest didn't pretend to be something it wasn't. That Merlin lasted for 400 years, from the 6th century to the 12th. A local Welsh legend about a prophet who couldn't save anyone. And then Geoffrey of Monmouth decided that wasn't dramatic enough, wasn't useful enough, wasn't powerful enough. So he took that broken man and turned him into something else entirely. He took the victim and made him the architect. He took the madman and made him the monster. In 1136, A Welsh monk named Geoffrey of Monmouth was living in Oxford, England. England was in the middle of a civil war. The anarchy, they called it. The king was dead. Two claimants were fighting for the throne. The country was tearing itself apart. Geoffrey decided what England needed was a glorious past, a mythology, a story that explained where power comes from and who deserves to rule. So he wrote a book. He called it Historia Regum Britanniae, the history of the kings of Britain. He claimed he was translating from an ancient British book that had been given to him by a friend, a book that recorded the true history of Britain from its founding to the Saxon conquest. This book did not exist. Geoffrey made it up. Modern historians are certain of this, but Geoffrey presented it as fact, as history, as truth. And in that book, he needed a wizard, someone to explain how kings rose and fell, someone to give prophecies that justified the current political situation, someone to make it all seem like destiny rather than chaos. He took the Welsh legend of Myrddin, the madman in the forest, the traumatized prophet. He merged it with stories about a historical general named Ambrosius Aurelianus. He added his own inventions, and he created Merlinus, Merlin the wizard, Merlin the kingmaker, Merlin the architect. He took a story about a man who was powerless and turned it into a story about a man with ultimate power. And that Merlin, Geoffrey's Merlin, is very, very different from the broken prophet in the forest. This Merlin doesn't run from power. He wields it. This Merlin doesn't watch disasters happen. He causes them. This Merlin doesn't predict the future. He engineers it. So let me introduce you to the second Merlin, the one who turned a kingdom into his personal experiment, the one who decided that he would choose the king, create the king, control the king, the one who might have been the real villain all along, the monster. This version of Merlin comes from two main sources, and you need to understand what they are before we begin. First, Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Regum Britanniae, written in 1136. Geoffrey was a cleric in Oxford during the English Civil War known as the Anarchy. His book claimed to be history, but was actually historical fiction, propaganda designed to legitimize Norman rule over Britain by giving them a glorious, mythical past. Second, Robert de Boron's Merlin, written in French around 1200. This was a verse romance, poetic fiction that added the demon origin story. De Boron was writing during the height of church power, and he needed to show that even demonic evil could be redeemed through Christianity. Neither of these are history, they're stories. Made up, invented, written 600 to 700 years after the events they claim to describe. But they're the stories that stuck. That defined Merlin for the next 800 years. That turned him from a traumatized prophet into the most powerful wizard in literature. And when you read them carefully, when you strip away the medieval moralizing and look at what Merlin actually does in these stories, he's not a hero. He's something much darker. Let's begin. The story, according to Robert de Boron, begins in hell. The demons were furious. Jesus Christ had harrowed hell, descended after his crucifixion, and freed the righteous souls who had been trapped there since the beginning of time. The demons had lost their power over humanity's salvation, so they decided to create a counter-Christ, an anti-savior, a being who would have demonic power but human form, who could walk the earth and corrupt it from within. They needed a child born of both worlds, demon and human. evil and mortal. The plan was elegant. An incubus, a male demon who could take physical form, would visit a human woman and impregnate her. The child would inherit the demon's powers, but being born of human flesh, would be able to interact with the mortal world in ways pure demons could not. They chose their target carefully. A young woman, devout Christian, virgin, living alone with her mother and sisters after her father's death. The incubus came to her at night. She didn't know what was happening. She thought she was dreaming. Dark dreams, disturbing dreams, dreams where something visited her in the darkness and she couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't wake up. Medieval people called it the nightmare. The weight on your chest in the night, the presence in your room, the thing that holds you down. Modern medicine has names for it: sleep paralysis, hypnagogic hallucinations. But in the medieval world, it was real. It was demonic visitation. Night after night, the incubus came to her, and she couldn't stop it. Then she missed her monthly bleeding. Then she felt the child growing inside her. She went to her confessor in tears and terror. "Father, I don't understand what's happening to me. I've been with no man. I've taken no lover. I've remained pure as my faith demands. But I'm with child. Something comes to me in the night. Something not human. What do I do?" The priest believed her, because these things happened. The world was full of demons, and demons could do terrible things. But belief didn't mean forgiveness. The child in her womb was still demon spawn, still a threat, still potentially the Antichrist. She was imprisoned, locked away so the demon couldn't visit her again, guarded so she couldn't harm herself or the child, fed and cared for, but treated like a dangerous thing. And 9 months later, she gave birth to a son. The moment the child was born, everyone in the room knew something was wrong. He looked human, perfect even, beautiful, but his eyes were too aware, too knowing. He looked at the people around him, not like an infant looks, with unfocused wonder, but like an adult looks. Like he understood exactly what was happening. And when the midwife held him up, the candles flared. Every candle in the room suddenly burned twice as bright. The shadows on the walls seemed to move on their own. Someone swore they heard whispering in a language that predated Latin, predated Greek, predated any human tongue. The priest rushed forward with holy water, dunked the baby in it before he had even taken his second breath, spoke the words of baptism as fast as he could, as if speed would make the blessing take hold before the demon nature could resist. The child didn't cry, didn't scream, just looked at the priest with those two knowing eyes. They named him Merlin, a corruption of the Welsh name Myrddin, softened to fit Norman tongues. And immediately the debate began. What do we do with him? The church courts argued for months. The child was clearly demonic in origin. His mother insisted she'd never lain with a man. The priest confirmed the supernatural nature of his conception, but he'd been baptized. Did that save his soul? Could baptism overcome demonic blood? If they killed him, would they be murdering a redeemed Christian? If they let him live, would they be unleashing the Antichrist? They decided to put him on trial. Let the law determine his fate. The trial took place when Merlin was 7 years old enough to speak for himself, old enough to understand that they were debating whether to execute him. The charge was straightforward: being the son of a demon. the potential threat he posed, the danger of allowing him to grow to full power. The prosecution called witnesses. The mother testified about the nighttime visits. The priest testified about the baptism. Scholars testified about demonic powers and the nature of incubi. Through it all, Merlin sat quietly. A small boy in a large room full of men deciding his fate. Finally, the judge turned to him. "Child, do you understand what you're accused of?" "Yes," Merlin said. His voice was clear, calm, not the voice of a frightened 7-year-old. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" "I have a question first," Merlin said. "Are you certain you want me to speak? Are you certain you want me to demonstrate what I inherited from my father?" The room went quiet. "Because I can do things," Merlin continued. "I can see things. Things that are hidden. Things that are secret. Things that people would very much prefer to remain unknown. Should I share those things? Would that help my defense?" The judge leaned forward. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting," Merlin said, "that before you condemn me for being the son of a demon, you might want to consider your own parentage." "What?" "Your mother," Merlin said, "the woman who raised you. She knows something that the man who raised you never knew. Would you like me to tell everyone? Would you like me to prove that I can see secrets? Or would you prefer to find me innocent and send me on my way?" The judge's face went pale. "You're bluffing. Am I? Should we test that? Should I tell this entire court who your real father is? Should I describe the affair your mother had? Should I name the man?" Silence. Complete silence. "I didn't think so," Merlin said. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to declare that my baptism saved my soul, that I'm a Christian now, regardless of my birth, that I'm free to go, and in return, I'll keep your mother's secret." "This is blackmail," the judge whispered. "This is survival," Merlin corrected, "which is more than you were willing to offer me." The judge called a recess, spoke privately with his mother. She confirmed everything, the affair, the real father, all of it. When the court reconvened, the judge announced his decision. Merlin was baptized Christian. His soul was saved. He was free to go. But everyone in that room understood what had really happened. A 7-year-old child had just blackmailed a judge, had proven he could see hidden truths, had demonstrated the power he'd inherited from his demonic father. And he'd used that power not to do good, not to help others, but to save himself through manipulation and threat. This is where Geoffrey of Monmouth's Merlin begins. Not as a victim, not as a prophet crying in the wilderness, but as a calculating manipulator who uses his power to control others. And he was just getting started. Word of Merlin spread quickly after the trial. A child who could see secrets, who could know hidden truths, who had power beyond human understanding but could walk among humans freely. Kings started to take notice, and one king in particular had a problem that maybe only Merlin could solve. His name was Vortigern, and he was trying to build a tower that kept falling down. King Vortigern was in trouble. The Saxons, Germanic tribes from across the sea, were invading Britain. Vortigern had actually invited them initially, hiring them as mercenaries to fight the Picts and Irish, who were raiding from the north and west. But the Saxons had decided they liked Britain. They'd brought their families, they'd settled, and now they were taking land by force, pushing the British kingdoms back, establishing their own territories. Vortigern needed a fortress, a stronghold where he could defend himself against the Saxons he'd foolishly invited. So he chose a hill in North Wales, a strategic location, easy to defend, hard to attack. He brought in the best engineers in Britain, laid the foundations, began building the walls, and every night the walls collapsed. They would build all day, solid stone walls, well constructed, properly mortared. The engineers would inspect them, declare them sound. Everyone would go to sleep. And in the morning, the walls would be rubble, stones scattered across the hillside like someone had taken a giant hammer to them. This happened night after night, week after week. They tried different locations on the hill, different designs, different materials. Nothing worked. Vortigern's engineers had no explanation. The construction was sound. The materials were solid. There was no reason for the walls to keep collapsing. So Vortigern did what medieval kings did when conventional solutions failed. He consulted his court magicians. The magicians performed their divinations, read entrails, consulted stars, burned sacred herbs, spoke in tongues, and they came back with an answer. The hill is cursed. The spirits of the land reject your tower. They're pulling it down from beneath. The only way to break the curse is blood sacrifice. What kind of sacrifice? Vortigern asked. A boy with no mortal father. A child born without a human father's seed. Find such a boy. Bring him here. Kill him on the foundation stone. Mix his blood into the mortar. That will bind the walls. That will make the spirits accept your tower. Vortigern sent his soldiers out to search. Find me a boy with no mortal father. And they came back with reports of Merlin, the demon's child, born of an incubus and a virgin. No human father. Perfect for the sacrifice. They dragged Merlin to the construction site. He was still young, early teens perhaps. He looked at the collapsed walls, the frustrated engineers, the gathered court, and he smiled. Before you kill me, he said, would you like to know why your tower keeps falling down? Would you like to know what's really happening here? Your death is what's happening here, Vortigern said. My magicians have determined. Your magicians are idiots, Merlin interrupted. And they're trying to kill me because they don't want you to know that they're idiots. My blood won't fix your problem, but I can show you what will. Vortigern was intrigued despite himself. What are you proposing? Let me prove I can see what your magicians can't. Let me show you what's really beneath this hill. And then, if I'm wrong, you can kill me. But if I'm right, you'll owe me. Owe you what? We'll get to that, Merlin said. First, I need you to dig, right there, beneath where you've been laying your foundations. Dig deep. Vortigern ordered it done. His engineers weren't happy, all that work for nothing, but they dug. 10 feet down, they hit water, an underground pool. Keep digging, Merlin said. Around the pool. Find its edges. They dug. The pool was large, maybe 30 feet across, and at its deepest point, there were caverns beneath the water. 2 of them, one on each side. Now, Merlin said, wait. They waited. And as the afternoon sun began to set, something stirred beneath the water. First, ripples, then bubbles, then the water began to churn, and then it erupted. Two creatures emerged from the underground lake. Geoffrey of Monmouth calls them dragons. The Welsh poems call them worms, serpent-like, enormous, terrible. One was white, pale scales that gleamed in the dying light. The other was red, dark crimson, the color of blood. They were huge, bigger than horses, longer than the tower would have been tall. They'd been sleeping in the caverns beneath the hill, and the construction had woken them, and they were angry. The dragons fought. Not with fire. Geoffrey doesn't mention fire breathing in this scene. They fought like animals, claws and teeth, coiling around each other. The white dragon had the advantage at first. It was larger, stronger. It pushed the red dragon back, pinned it down. But the red dragon was faster. It twisted free, got behind the white dragon, bit down on its neck. The white dragon thrashed, screamed, a sound that made everyone watching cover their ears. The battle lasted for hours, back and forth. The white dragon dominating, then the red rallying. Finally, as the sun fully set, the red dragon managed to get a killing grip. The white dragon went still. The red dragon released it, let the corpse fall into the pool. Then the red dragon looked at the assembled court, locked eyes with Vortigern, and plunged back into the water, disappearing into the caves below. Everyone was silent, stunned, terrified. Finally, Vortigern turned to Merlin. "What was that?" "The reason your walls keep falling," Merlin said calmly. "You were building on top of an underground lake that housed two massive creatures. Every time you laid stones, the vibrations woke them. They'd thrash around in their sleep, shake the foundations, knock your walls down. Your tower was never going to stand here, not because of curses, because of engineering." "The dragons are a symbol," Merlin interrupted. "Everything is a symbol if you know how to read it. The white dragon is the Saxons. The red dragon is the Britons. What you just watched was a prophecy of Britain's future." "The red dragon won," Vortigern said. "Eventually. After a long struggle, the Saxons will seem victorious at first. They'll take land, establish kingdoms, appear unstoppable. But the Britons will rise again, under a king who's coming. A king who will unite the tribes and drive back the Saxons. A king who will create a golden age that will be remembered for 1,000 years. Who? Who is this king? "You won't live to see him," Merlin said flatly. "You're not that king. You invited the Saxons in. You're part of the problem, not the solution. But I'll make sure he's born. I'll engineer his conception, his childhood, his rise to power. I'll make sure the prophecy comes true." "Why would you do that?" "Because I can see what's coming," Merlin said. "And unlike the man in the forest who could only watch and weep, I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to shape the future instead of just predicting it." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and your magicians? The ones who tried to have me killed? I'd suggest replacing them. They're clearly not very good at their jobs." This is the moment where Merlin transforms from reactive to proactive, from victim to architect. The madman in the forest, Myrddin, saw the future and ran from it, unable to bear the weight of knowing what was coming. Merlin, Geoffrey's Merlin, sees the future and decides to create it, to engineer it, to make it happen the way he wants it to happen. He doesn't just predict the coming king, he decides he's going to make that king. From scratch. He's going to choose the parents, orchestrate the conception, control every aspect of the child's life, and create the perfect ruler. not because he serves that king, but because he serves his own vision of what Britain should be. This is not prophecy, this is playing God. And the first step in his plan requires something dark, something that even Geoffrey of Monmouth, writing to make British kings look glorious, couldn't quite disguise as noble. It requires rape. The next king after Vortigern was Uther Pendragon. Pendragon means head dragon or chief dragon. He took the title after the prophecy of the Red Dragon. He wanted to be the one who would unite Britain, who would drive back the Saxons, who would fulfill Merlin's prophecy. But Merlin knew Uther wasn't the one. Uther was strong, a capable warrior, a decent military leader, but he wasn't the promised king. He was just the next step. The vehicle Merlin would use to create the real king. Uther was hosting a feast, a gathering of lords and ladies to celebrate a victory over Saxon raiders. And at that feast, he saw a woman who would change the course of British history. Her name was Igraine. She was the Duchess of Cornwall, wife of Duke Gorlois. She was beautiful. Geoffrey of Monmouth spends an unusual amount of time describing her beauty, her grace, her poise, and Uther became obsessed. He couldn't eat, couldn't think, couldn't focus on anything except her. He would stare at her across the hall and everyone noticed, including her husband. Duke Gorlois understood what was happening. He'd seen men look at his wife before. She was known for her beauty throughout Britain, but this was different. This was the king, and the king's desire was dangerous. Gorlois took Igraine and left the feast early, returned to Cornwall, locked her in his most secure castle, Tintagel, built on a rocky peninsula accessible only by a narrow bridge. One entrance, easily defended. She would be safe there while he dealt with Uther's attentions. But Uther's obsession only grew worse. He sent messages to Gorlois, demanding his presence at court. Gorlois refused. Uther sent more messages, threatening. Gorlois still refused. Finally, Uther declared war on Cornwall, raised an army, marched south to take by force what he couldn't have by law. But even then, he couldn't reach Igraine. Tintagel was impregnable. He could besiege it, but that would take months. He could starve them out, but that would harm her. He wanted her alive, willing, in his arms. He was going mad with desire, and that's when he turned to Merlin. "I need her," Uther told him. "I'll die without her. Nothing matters except having her. Help me." And Merlin smiled, because this was exactly what he'd been waiting for. "I can give her to you," Merlin said. "How? The castle is impregnable. Her husband guards her. She's loyal to him. There's no way." "There are always ways," Merlin interrupted. "I can put you in her bedroom tonight. I can make it so she welcomes you. I can give you exactly what you want." "How?" "Magic, illusion, deception. Does it matter how? I can do it, but it will cost you." "Anything," Uther said immediately. "Land, gold, title, whatever you want." "I don't want land," Merlin said. "I want the child." "What child?" "The child that will be conceived when you lie with Igraine. Whatever child comes from that union, I want it. The moment it's born, you'll give it to me. You'll never see it. You'll never know it. You'll never raise it. Do you agree?" Uther should have asked more questions, should have wondered why Merlin wanted his child, should have been suspicious of a deal this dark, but he was too far gone, too consumed by lust, too desperate. "Yes," he said, "the child is yours. Now give me what I want." What happened next is described matter-of-factly in Geoffrey of Monmouth's text. He doesn't seem to realize, or doesn't want his readers to realize, how horrifying it actually is. Merlin used magic to change Uther's appearance, made him look exactly like Duke Gorlois. His face, his body, his voice, his mannerisms, everything. Perfect mimicry. That night, while the real Gorlois was away leading his troops, Uther, wearing Gorlois' face, rode to Tintagel, crossed the bridge, presented himself at the castle gates. The guards let him in because he looked like their lord, sounded like their lord. Why would they question it? He went to Igraine's chambers, knocked. She opened the door, saw her husband, and welcomed him in. They had sex. She consented, but she consented to the wrong man. She thought she was lying with her husband. She didn't know. She couldn't know. This is rape. Unambiguously. She consented to one person and got another. That's rape by deception. That's a violation on a profound level. But Geoffrey of Monmouth doesn't frame it that way. He frames it as clever, as a problem solved, as Merlin helping his king get what he wanted. The medieval morality here is disturbing, but it's important to understand because it shows you what Merlin is willing to do, what lines he's willing to cross, what principles he's willing to violate to achieve his goals. He orchestrated a rape to create the child he wanted. That same night, and Geoffrey makes sure to tell us this, because it's too perfect to be coincidence. Duke Gorlois died in battle, killed by Uther's forces, while Uther himself was sleeping with Gorlois' wife. 3 hours later, a messenger arrived at Tintagel with news of the Duke's death. Igraine was confused. How could her husband be dead in battle when he'd just been in her bed? The illusion had already worn off. Uther looked like himself again. She saw him and screamed, realized what had happened, realized she'd been tricked, deceived, violated. Uther declared that now that Gorlois was dead, he would marry her, make her his queen, legitimize everything that had happened. What choice did she have? Her husband was dead. The king had already taken her. Refusing would achieve nothing except her own destruction. So she married him, became Queen Igraine, and 9 months later, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The moment the baby was born, before the midwife had even cut the cord, Merlin appeared. Not at the door, not announced by guards. He simply appeared in the bedchamber, as if he'd been waiting just outside reality for this moment. "The debt," he said. "Pay it." Uther, holding his newborn son for the first time, looked up in shock. "Merlin, I've changed my mind. He's my son, my heir, the child who will carry my bloodline. I can't just give him to you." "You already did," Merlin said. "Months ago, when you were desperate, when you would have agreed to anything. The bargain was made, the price was set, now pay it. I'm the king, and I'm the one who made you feel like a king when you were just a man with an obsession," Merlin interrupted. "The deal was, you get the woman, I get the child. Those were the terms. Do you really want to break a bargain with me? The threat was implicit but clear. Merlin could ruin Uther, could reveal what really happened that night at Tintagel, could destroy his legitimacy, his marriage, everything. Igraine, weak from childbirth but listening, made the decision for him. "Take him," she said. Her voice was hollow. "Take him and go. I don't want to see him. He's a reminder of what was done to me. Every time I look at him, I'll remember that night, that violation. Take him." Merlin took the baby, held him up, examined him like evaluating livestock. The child didn't cry. He looked at Merlin with clear eyes, as if he understood exactly what was happening. "Perfect," Merlin said. "I'll call him Arthur." "Where are you taking him?" Uther demanded. "What are you going to do with my son?" "I'm going to raise him to be the king Britain needs," Merlin said. "Not the king you would make him. Not spoiled and entitled and convinced of his own superiority. I'm going to make him into someone worthy of the throne, someone who understands sacrifice and duty and service. By taking him from his mother, by stealing him away, by giving him a childhood you never had," Merlin interrupted. "He'll be raised by good people. Simple people. He'll learn humility. He'll learn what it means to work. He'll grow up not knowing he's special, not knowing he's chosen. And then, when the time is right, I'll reveal his birthright, and he'll appreciate it instead of expecting it." "You're insane." "I'm thorough," Merlin corrected. "I told you I would engineer the coming king." This is how you engineer a king. From conception to coronation. Every detail controlled, every variable managed. This child will be exactly what Britain needs, because I'll make sure of it. And he left, walked out of the castle with the newborn baby, left Uther and Igraine sitting in shocked silence, one feeling robbed and one feeling relieved. Merlin took baby Arthur to a minor knight named Sir Ector, a good man, loyal, honest, not ambitious. He had a son of his own, Kay, about a year older than Arthur. Merlin appeared at Ector's modest castle with a baby and a simple instruction: raise this child as your own. Tell no one where he came from. Give him a good upbringing. Teach him honor, duty, hard work. Don't spoil him. Don't tell him he's special. When the time comes, I'll return for him. Can you do this? Ector had no idea who the baby really was, but when Merlin asked something, you didn't refuse. I can do that, Ector said. Good. His name is Arthur. He's your son now. Treat him as such. And for the next 15 years, that's exactly what happened. Arthur grew up as Ector's second son. He knew nothing about his real parents, nothing about Merlin's plans, nothing about his destiny. He was just a boy, helping in the stables, learning to fight, playing with his older brother Kay, living a normal, unremarkable life. Exactly as Merlin had planned. But here's what Geoffrey of Monmouth's text forces us to ask. Why did Merlin do this? Different medieval writers gave different answers. He was serving God's plan for Britain. He was fulfilling the prophecy he himself had made about the Red Dragon King. He wanted to create the perfect ruler. He was trying to save Britain from the Saxons. But there's another possibility, one that the texts hint at, but never state directly. What if Merlin was serving himself? Think about what he's done so far. Blackmailed a judge to save himself at age 7, manipulated Vortigern into believing his prophecies, orchestrated a rape to create a specific child, stolen that child to raise in secret. None of this is the behavior of a servant. This is the behavior of someone playing a very long game. Someone with their own agenda. someone who's building something we don't fully understand yet. Merlin keeps saying he's creating the king Britain needs. But what if he's creating the king Merlin needs? What if Arthur isn't the hero of this story, but the pawn in a game that only Merlin understands? The demon's son claimed his baptism saved his soul. But what if it didn't? What if he's still following his father's purpose? Not to serve God, but to corrupt everything he touches? What if the coming golden age of Camelot is actually a trap, and Arthur is the bait? We won't know, not for another 15 years, not until Merlin's plan reaches its next phase. The phase where he proves Arthur is the rightful king, with another manipulation, another trick, another engineered miracle, the sword in the stone. King Uther reigned for 15 years after Arthur's birth. He married Igraine officially. They had no other children together. Geoffrey doesn't say why, but the implication is that their marriage bed was cold, that Igraine never forgave what was done to her, that Uther never stopped feeling guilty about it. Arthur grew up with Sir Ector. He was a good kid, not remarkable, not showing signs of special destiny, just a second son learning how to be a knight. His foster brother Kay was better at swordplay, faster, stronger, more naturally gifted. Arthur worked harder, practiced more, compensated for his smaller stature with technique and determination. Ector loved both boys equally. He had no idea that one of them was actually the king's son. As far as he knew, Arthur was just another foundling that Merlin had asked him to raise. It happened sometimes in those days, children born to noble girls who couldn't keep them, orphans of war, complications. And then King Uther died. The cause of death varies by version. Some say illness, some say poison, some say he just gave up, broken by guilt and a loveless marriage. What mattered was, Britain had no heir. No one knew about Arthur. Uther and Igraine had no other acknowledged children. The throne was empty, and Britain, as it always did when there was no strong king, began to tear itself apart. Every lord with a drop of royal blood claimed the throne. Every duke with an army thought they deserved it. Every earl with ambition saw an opportunity. The kingdom was fracturing again, exactly as it had after Vortigern, exactly as Merlin had predicted it would, unless someone could unite them, unless someone could prove their right to rule so completely that no one could question it, unless there was a miracle. On Christmas Day, in the courtyard of the greatest cathedral in London, a miracle occurred, or at least that's what everyone called it. Overnight, a massive stone block appeared in the courtyard, smooth, dark granite, impossible to move, and embedded in the stone, driven down to the hilt, was a sword. Not a small sword, not a decorative blade, a real weapon, a long sword, practical and deadly, the kind a king would carry into battle. And on the stone, carved in letters of gold, were words: "Whoso pulleth out this sword of this stone is rightwise king born of all England." Everyone tried, every lord, every duke, every knight, every warrior who thought they had a claim. They gripped the handle, they pulled, they strained until their hands bled and their muscles tore. Some brought oils to lubricate the blade. Some brought tools to widen the crack. Some brought teams of horses to pull with ropes. The sword didn't move, not a fraction of an inch. Days passed, weeks. The sword became famous. People travelled from across Britain to try, to prove they were the rightwise king. None succeeded. And then, in early January, there was a great tournament in London. Knights from across the kingdom came to compete. to show their skill, to prove their worth. Sir Ector brought both his sons. Kay was competing. He was old enough, skilled enough, ready to prove himself. Arthur came as his squire, to carry Kay's equipment, to help him prepare. On the morning of Kay's first joust, they discovered a problem. Kay had forgotten his sword, left it back at their lodgings across the city, and the joust was starting in minutes. "Arthur," Kay said desperately, "run back and get my sword, quickly." Arthur ran, but when he got to their lodgings, the building was locked. The landlord had gone to watch the tournament. Arthur couldn't get in. He needed a sword. Any sword. Kay couldn't compete without one. And then Arthur remembered. There was that sword. The one in the stone. The one that no one could pull out. The one that sat ignored now because everyone had given up trying. He ran to the cathedral. The courtyard was empty. Everyone was at the tournament. Just Arthur and the stone and the sword. He didn't think about the inscription, didn't think about destiny or prophecy or rightful kings. He just needed a sword for his brother. He grabbed the handle and pulled. The sword came out of the stone like drawing a knife from butter. No resistance, no effort. It just came free. Arthur stood there, shocked, holding a sword that shouldn't have been removable. He looked around, but there was no one to see. No witnesses, no fanfare. He ran back to the tournament and gave the sword to Kay. Kay recognized the sword immediately. Everyone in Britain knew what it looked like by now. "Arthur," he said slowly, "where did you get this?" "The stone. In the cathedral courtyard." "Why?" You pulled it out?" "Yes." "Was I not supposed to? I'm sorry. I just needed a sword for you and we need to show father, right now." They found Sir Ector in the stands. Kay showed him the sword. Ector went pale. "Who pulled it out?" he demanded. "Arthur," Kay admitted. "He pulled it out to get me a sword." Ector turned to Arthur. "Show me. Show me right now." They went to the cathedral. The stone was there, the hole where the sword had been clearly visible. Ector made Arthur put the sword back in. Arthur slid it into the stone. It sank in easily, like the stone was accepting it back. "Now pull it out again," Ector said. Arthur did. Same result. The sword came free with no effort. "Let me try," Ector said. He grabbed the handle, pulled, strained, nothing. The sword wouldn't budge for him. "Kay, you try." Kay pulled, same result. The sword was locked in place. "Arthur, one more time." Arthur pulled. The sword came free. Sir Ector knelt. Right there in the courtyard. He knelt before the boy he'd raised for 15 years. "My lord," he said. "Father, what are you doing? Get up. You don't need to." "You're not my son," Ector said gently. "I've always known that. Merlin brought you to me as a baby, asked me to raise you well, and I did. But you're not mine. You're Britain's. I don't understand." "You're the right wise king," Ector said. "The sword has chosen you. Or more likely, Merlin arranged this entire thing to reveal you at the right moment. But it doesn't matter. You pulled the sword. Everyone will have to acknowledge you now." "But I don't want to be king. I don't know how to." "You'll learn," Ector said. "Merlin will teach you, whether you want to or not." Word spread quickly. The boy who pulled the sword, the rightful king revealed. Everyone demanded proof. Arthur was brought before the assembled lords, made to pull the sword in front of them. He did it effortlessly. One by one, the lords knelt. Some willingly, some reluctantly, but they all knelt, because the sword didn't lie. The miracle was real. The prophecy was fulfilled. Arthur was crowned king. united Britain under one rule. The fracturing stopped, the petty wars ended, the Golden Age began, and through it all, Merlin stood in the background, watching, smiling, because he'd done it. He'd engineered a king from conception to coronation, every detail controlled, every step managed, the rape of a grain to conceive the right bloodline, the theft of Arthur to give him the right upbringing, the sword in the stone to prove his legitimacy at the right moment. All Merlin, all planned, all manipulated. But here's the question that Geoffrey of Monmouth never quite addresses. Who put the sword in the stone? It appeared overnight, like magic, in the courtyard of the most important cathedral in London, with a prophecy carved into it. And only one specific boy, the boy Merlin had been engineering for 15 years, could pull it out. This wasn't a test. This was theatre. This was a magic trick performed on a national scale. Merlin put that sword there. Merlin enchanted it so only Arthur could pull it free. Merlin manufactured the entire miracle to legitimize the king he'd created. The lords didn't choose Arthur. God didn't choose Arthur. The sword didn't choose Arthur. Merlin chose Arthur. 15 years earlier, before Arthur was even born. And the sword in the stone was just the reveal, the grand finale, the moment when Merlin proved to everyone that his chosen puppet was the rightful king. It worked perfectly. Arthur became king. Britain united. The prophecy appeared fulfilled. But a king made by manipulation, crowned through deception, legitimized by a manufactured miracle. What kind of kingdom does that create? What kind of golden age is built on lies? Merlin became Arthur's chief advisor, his counselor, his mentor, the power behind the throne. Every decision Arthur made, Merlin guided. Every policy Arthur enacted, Merlin suggested. Every war Arthur fought, Merlin planned. Arthur was a good man, kind, just, noble. Everything Ector's upbringing had made him. He genuinely wanted to help Britain, to create peace, to establish justice. But he was also Merlin's creation, Merlin's puppet, Merlin's experiment in engineered rulership. And Merlin never told him the full truth, never explained that his conception was rape, that his birth was a transaction, that his crown was a magic trick. Arthur believed in the sword, believed in his destiny, believed he was chosen by God to rule. And maybe that belief made him a better king. Maybe the lie served a good purpose. Or maybe it meant that Britain's greatest king was built on a foundation of deception. And when you build on lies, eventually, inevitably, the foundation cracks. For years, it seemed to work. Arthur's reign was everything Merlin had promised. Camelot, the Round Table, knights bound by oaths of honor, justice spreading across the land. The Saxons pushed back, peace established. The golden age Merlin had prophesied was happening, because Merlin had made it happen. But there were cracks, small ones at first. Arthur had half-sisters, Morgan le Fay and Morgause, daughters of Igraine from her first marriage. They'd grown up in the old traditions, the pagan ways. And they hated Arthur, hated what he represented, hated the Christian kingdom he was building over the bones of the old world. Morgan especially studied magic, tried to match Merlin's power, tried to understand what he was really doing. And she started to see the pattern, the manipulation, the control, the way Merlin pulled strings and called it destiny. She tried to warn Arthur. He's using you. He's not serving you. You're serving his plan, whatever that plan is. But Arthur trusted Merlin. Merlin had made him king. Merlin had guided him to glory. Why would he lie? And then something happened that changed everything. Something that exposed the final, darkest part of Merlin's plan. Arthur met Morte at a celebration. He didn't know who she was. They'd never met before. She was beautiful. He was young, drunk on victory and wine. They spent the night together, and 9 months later, she gave birth to a son. His name was Mordred. Mordred, who was both Arthur's son and Arthur's nephew, the product of accidental incest. Mordred, who would grow up twisted by the circumstances of his birth, who would hate his father-uncle, who would eventually lead a rebellion. Mordred, who would kill Arthur at the Battle of Camelot, who would end the Golden Age, who would destroy Camelot. Did Merlin know this would happen? The texts claim he did, that he tried to warn Arthur, that he saw the doom coming but couldn't prevent it. But there's another reading available, one that's darker, one that the medieval writers don't quite say, but definitely imply. What if Merlin wanted Mordred? What if he engineered the meeting between Arthur and Morte? What if the entire golden age of Camelot was always meant to end in tragedy? What if the demon's son wasn't creating Britain's greatest king? What if he was creating Britain's greatest tragedy? What if Merlin's plan, from the very beginning, was to build something beautiful, just so he could watch it fall apart? We'll never know for certain. Because before we could see how Merlin's plan played out, before we could watch Arthur and Mordred meet on the battlefield, before Camelot fell, Merlin himself was destroyed. Not by Arthur, not by Morgan, not by God or demon or prophecy, by a woman, a student, someone he thought he controlled, someone who turned his own teachings against him, someone who sealed him away forever in the ultimate betrayal. Let me introduce you to the third Merlin, not the madman, not the monster, the fool. This final version of Merlin comes primarily from two sources. First, the Vulgate cycle, also called the Lancelot Grail, a massive French prose work written between 1210 and 1230 by unknown clerics. This is where the character of Nimue, or Viviane, or Ninian, the manuscripts can't agree on spelling, first appears. Second, Sir Thomas Malory's Le Morte d'Arthur, written in English in 1469 to 1470, while Malory was imprisoned. Malory synthesized all the earlier French sources into one coherent narrative. But here's what's important. Even within these sources, there are contradictory versions of this story. Different manuscripts give completely different motivations to both Merlin and Nimue. In some versions, Merlin is a tragic figure, a lonely old man who falls in love and is betrayed. In other versions, he's a predatory old wizard pursuing a much younger woman who defends herself by trapping him. In some versions, Nimue is a hero, stopping a dangerous manipulator before he can do more harm. In others, she's a villain, destroying her teacher for power and position. The medieval writers couldn't agree on who the hero was in this story, which tells you something important. There might not be a hero. There might just be two people with power, using it on each other, and both losing. We're going to tell you the darkest version, the most ambiguous one, the one where no one is purely good and no one is purely evil, because that's the most interesting one, and possibly the most true. Let's meet the woman who destroyed Merlin. Her name was Nimue, or Viviane, or Ninian, or Nineveh, or Nineveh, or Ninue. The manuscripts can't even agree on her name, which is appropriate because they can't agree on anything else about her either. What they do agree on, she was young, beautiful, and she caught Merlin's attention. This happened late in Arthur's reign. Camelot was established. The Round Table was complete. The Golden Age was in full swing. Merlin was old by now. How old varies by version, but he'd been advisor to 3 kings. He'd shaped the fate of Britain for decades, and he was tired, lonely, powerful beyond measure, but isolated by that power. No peers, no equals, no one who understood what it was like to see what he could see. Until he met her. She was by a lake, just sitting there, watching the water. The story makes much of this. The lake, the water, the reflection. Like she was contemplating something deep, or like she was bait in a trap. Merlin approached her, introduced himself. She knew who he was. Everyone in Britain knew who Merlin was. "I've heard stories about you," she said, "about your power, your knowledge, your magic." "What else have you heard?" Merlin asked. "That you can see the future, that you engineered a king from nothing, that you're the most dangerous man in Britain, and yet you're not afraid." "Should I be?" That's how it started. A conversation by a lake, an old wizard and a young woman, and what happened next depends entirely on which version you believe. In this version, Merlin fell in love. Genuinely, completely, perhaps for the first time in his life. He was old. He'd spent his entire life manipulating others, controlling outcomes, engineering destinies. He'd never allowed himself personal attachments, never let anyone close. Too dangerous, too complicated, too human. But Nimue was different. She was intelligent, curious. She asked questions that showed real understanding. She wasn't intimidated by his power. She met him as an equal, even though she was decades younger and had no magic of her own. He found himself visiting the lake repeatedly, talking with her, teaching her small things, how to read the stars, how to understand the patterns of nature, how to see the connections that most people missed. "I could teach you real magic," he offered one day, "if you want to learn." "Why would you do that?" she asked. "Because I've spent my entire life manipulating people who couldn't understand what I was doing. It would be pleasant to talk to someone who could, to share this with someone, to not be alone anymore." "Aren't you afraid I'll surpass you?" "I'm too old to be afraid of that," Merlin said, "and too lonely to care." So he taught her, for months, then years. He showed her everything, every spell, every secret, every technique he'd learned over his long life. He taught her how to see the future, not clearly, not perfectly, but in glimpses and shadows. He taught her how to change her appearance, how to command elements, how to speak to animals and trees. He taught her how to bind someone with magic, how to create a prison that no one could escape, how to seal a person away from the world. "Why are you teaching me this?" she asked once. "This is dangerous knowledge." "Because I trust you," Merlin said, "and because I'm tired, so tired. I've been serving kings and shaping kingdoms for decades. I've seen so much death, so much betrayal, so much suffering. I think I want to rest. And before I do, I want to make sure my knowledge doesn't die with me." "You're planning to retire?" "Something like that. And this is where it gets ambiguous. Because what happened next could be interpreted multiple ways. Nimue asked Merlin to teach her one final spell, the greatest spell of all, how to create a place outside of time, a sanctuary, a perfect prison or a perfect refuge, depending on your perspective. "Why do you want to know this?" Merlin asked. "Because you need it," she said. You need to rest. You need to be somewhere safe, somewhere you can't be called back to service, somewhere you can finally stop watching the future and just exist. You want to trap me. I want to save you, she corrected. From yourself, from your responsibility, from the burden of knowing what's coming. You've spent your whole life serving others. Let me give you permission to stop. And Merlin, tired and lonely and in love, taught her. They went to a cave in Cornwall, a crystal cave according to some versions, just a deep cave in others, but a place of power, a place where magic ran strong. Are you certain? Merlin asked. Are you? Nimue replied. Yes, Merlin said. I'm so very tired, and I've seen what's coming for Arthur, the affair between Lancelot and Guinevere, the rebellion of Mordred, the fall of Camelot. I've seen it all, and I don't want to watch it happen. I don't want to be there for that. I've built Britain's golden age. I don't want to see its destruction. Then let me do this, Nimue said. Let me put you somewhere safe. Somewhere you can rest. Somewhere the future can't reach you. And Merlin stepped into the cave, lay down on the stone floor, closed his eyes. Nimue spoke the spell, the magic Merlin had taught her. The cave sealed, not with rock, but with something invisible and absolute, a barrier that couldn't be crossed, a prison that couldn't be opened from inside. Merlin was trapped, alive, aware, but unable to move, unable to speak, unable to affect the world in any way. In this version, that's what he wanted. The crystal cave was his retirement, his escape, his way of saying, I've done enough. Nimue walked away, became the Lady of the Lake, took Merlin's position as magical advisor to Arthur's court, used the knowledge he taught her to help where she could. And Merlin rested, finally, after decades of service and manipulation and control. Whether he's in peace or in torment, whether the cave is a refuge or a torture chamber, that depends on your perspective, and the story doesn't tell us. But there's another version, one that's much darker, one that Mallory hints at more strongly in his text. In this version, Merlin's interest in Nimue wasn't love, it was obsession, possession, the need to own something beautiful. He saw her by the lake and wanted her youth, her attention, her devotion. He was old, had spent his whole life manipulating others, and he wanted someone who was his, completely his. He pursued her, constantly, relentlessly, visiting her, bringing her gifts, offering to teach her magic, not because he wanted to share his knowledge, but because it was the only leverage he had. Nimue understood what was happening. An old man with immense power was pursuing a much younger woman, and she understood that refusing him directly was dangerous. Men with that much power didn't accept rejection well, so she accepted his offer to teach her, not because she wanted to learn, though the magic was fascinating, but because it was her only path to safety. If she learned could create space between them, could escape. She played the eager student, let him think she was falling for him, let him believe that his attention was welcome, all while learning everything she could. And Merlin, for all his power to see the future, was blind to what was happening, because he wanted her too much, because desire made him stupid, because he'd spent so long manipulating others that he couldn't see when he was being manipulated himself. He taught her everything, including the spell to create an inescapable prison. "Why do you want to know this?" he asked when she requested it. "So I can understand your power," she said. "So I can truly appreciate what you're capable of. Show me your greatest magic." Flattery. It worked. It always works on powerful men who think they're beyond manipulation. He showed her the spell, taught her how to seal someone away forever, how to create a barrier that no one could cross. And then, one day, they were walking together near a cave. Mallory says it was in Cornwall. The Vulgate Cycle says it was in Brittany. The location doesn't matter. What matters is what happened next. "Let me show you something inside," Merlin said. "There's a chamber deep in this cave, a place of power. I want to show you." And Nimue saw her opportunity. The cave, the spell he taught her, the chance to end this pursuit once and for all. "You first," she said. "I'll follow." Merlin entered the cave, walked deeper into the darkness, turned back to make sure she was following, and Nimue spoke the spell, the words Merlin had taught her, the magic he'd foolishly shared. The cave sealed, invisible barriers snapped into place. Merlin was trapped. He ran back to the entrance, pounded on the barrier, screamed, "What are you doing? Let me out! I taught you! I trusted you! I loved you!" Nimue stood outside the cave, unmoved. "You didn't love me," she said. "You wanted to own me. There's a difference. And you made a mistake. You thought that because I was younger, I was stupid. That because I was a woman, I was weak. That because I smiled and pretended to enjoy your attention, I actually did. I'll die in here." "No, you won't," Nimue said. "The spell doesn't kill. It just holds. You'll be alive, conscious, aware, forever. You'll have plenty of time to think about your mistakes, about the women you've manipulated over the decades, about Igraine, who you helped rape, about all the others. You'll have forever to contemplate what you did wrong. Please." "You taught me this spell," Nimue said. "You gave me the weapon I needed to defend myself. That was kind of you, stupid, but kind." And she walked away, left him screaming in the cave, left him trapped in the prison he'd designed. She went to Camelot, told Arthur that Merlin had gone into retirement, that he'd asked her to serve in his place. She became the Lady of the Lake, took his position, used his knowledge, and Merlin remained in the cave, alive but powerless, the victim of his own teaching and his own blind spot. But there's a third reading, one that's more subtle, one that Mallory especially seems to hint at. What if they were both playing games? What if both of them were predators, and this was just a question of who was better at it? Merlin was the demon's son, the architect of kingdoms, the man who orchestrated rapes and stole babies and engineered tragedies. He'd been manipulating people for decades. Did he really think he could fall in love? Did he really think he could trust anyone? Or was he testing Nimue, seeing if she was clever enough to turn his own lessons against him? And Nimue, was she really just an innocent victim defending herself? Or was she ambitious, seeing an opportunity to take power from an aging wizard, planning his downfall from the moment they met? In this version, Both of them knew exactly what they were doing. Merlin taught her the spell to trap him because he wanted to see if she'd do it. Because after decades of being the smartest person in every room, he wanted to see if anyone could beat him. And Nimue trapped him because she saw the opportunity, because she wanted his power, his position, his knowledge, and the easiest way to take it was to remove him from the board entirely. "Did you ever actually feel anything for me?" Merlin asked as she sealed the cave. "Does it matter?" Nimue replied. "I suppose not. Did you ever wonder if I wanted this? If I taught you that spell specifically so you'd use it on me?" "Did you?" Nimue asked. "Does it matter?" Merlin echoed. They stared at each other through the magical barrier. Two manipulators, two game players, two people who'd spent their lives controlling others, now locked in their final move against each other. "I could let you out," Nimue said. "I know the spell to open this. I could release you any time." "But you won't," Merlin said. "No, I won't, because you're ambitious. Because you're dangerous," Nimue corrected. "Because you've been engineering Britain's fate for decades. Because I've seen what you really are. And because someone needs to stop you before you finish whatever your real plan was." "You think you know my plan?" "I think you were always going to destroy Camelot," Nimue said. "I think the Golden Age was always meant to end in tragedy. I think you're your father's son, regardless of your baptism, and I think I just saved Arthur from whatever you were planning." "Or," Merlin said, "you just removed the one person who could have saved him, who could have prevented what's coming, who could have stopped Mordred before the rebellion began. Did you think of that?" "Yes," Nimue said, "I did. And I decided that whatever you were planning to do about Mordred would be worse than whatever Mordred does on his own." "You're probably right," Merlin admitted. "So we're done here." "Not quite," Merlin said. "Because you learned everything from me, which means you're capable of everything I was capable of, which means Britain just traded one manipulator for another. How is that better?" "Because I'm not planning to destroy it," Nimue said. "I'm planning to save it." "That's what I said too," Merlin replied, 60 years ago, when I was young and ambitious and certain I knew what was best. Look how that turned out." Nimue had no response to that. She turned and walked away, leaving Merlin in his cave, both of them knowing that she'd won. Both of them wondering if winning meant anything. Both of them understanding that power corrupts, that knowledge destroys, and that the student always, eventually, surpasses the teacher. And the only question that mattered, was Nimue any better than Merlin? Or had she just learned too well from her teacher? The medieval texts can't agree on where Merlin is trapped. Different versions place his prison in different locations. The Crystal Cave. Most famously, he's sealed in a cave in Cornwall. The walls are described as transparent crystal. He can see out, can watch the world passing by, but can't communicate, can't interact, can't do anything but observe. The Oak Tree. Some versions say Nimue transformed him into a tree. Not a dead tree, a living oak, aware, conscious, feeling the seasons pass, the wind in his branches, animals nesting in his trunk. Alive, but not alive. Human, but not human. The Invisible Tower. In some French versions, there's a tower. Not a physical tower, an invisible one, created entirely from magic. Merlin is at the top, surrounded by invisible walls, able to see the ground far below, but unable to descend. The Enchanted Forest. Some versions say he's somewhere in the forest of Brocéliande in Brittany, trapped in a clearing where time doesn't work properly. Days pass like years, or years pass like days. He's lost in temporal distortion. Under the lake. A few versions say he's beneath the lake where he first met Nimue, that she pulled him down into underwater caves where he remains, breathing water like air, trapped in a flooded labyrinth. The location varies, but the core of the story remains the same. Merlin is alive, aware, and completely powerless. The man who engineered kings and shaped kingdoms is now frozen, immobile, trapped, and he can still see the future. That's the worst part. He's not blind anymore. He can see what's coming, can see every disaster approaching, can see Camelot's fall, can see Arthur's death, can see everything he predicted coming true, and he can do nothing about it. The texts don't spend much time describing Merlin's imprisonment. They're more interested in Arthur's story, but a few versions give us glimpses of what it's like for him. Mallory mentions that Arthur sent knights to search for Merlin. Rumors kept circulating that he wasn't dead, just hidden, that if they could find him, he could save Camelot from the disasters that were beginning to pile up. Knights searched. They found caves in Cornwall, wandered through forests in Brittany. Some claimed to hear voices, whispering prophecies, crying for help, but no one could find the exact location. Or if they did, they couldn't break the spell. One version describes a knight finding the crystal cave. He could see Merlin inside, standing frozen like a statue, his eyes open and aware. The knight tried to break through, used his sword, then an axe, then tried to chip away the crystal with tools. Nothing worked. The barrier was absolute. And Merlin could see him, could see this knight, this loyal man, trying desperately to free him, could see the effort, the determination, the eventual exhaustion and defeat. But Merlin couldn't speak, couldn't call out, couldn't even blink, could only watch as the knight gave up and left, and the cave became silent again. This is the psychological horror of Merlin's prison. He's a prophet. He can see the future. That was always his gift and his curse, but now, trapped and immobile, it becomes pure torture. He sees Lancelot and Guinevere, the greatest knight and the queen, their affair, the adultery that will tear the Round Table apart. In another life, Merlin could have warned Arthur, could have prevented it, could have managed the situation. Now he can only watch. See it beginning, see it developing, see it spiraling toward disaster, see Arthur's heart breaking, see the kingdom fracturing. He sees Mordred growing up, Arthur's son-nephew, the product of accidental incest, twisted by the circumstances of his birth, raised by Morgause to hate his father-uncle, being shaped into the weapon that will destroy Camelot. Merlin can see the path, can see every choice Mordred makes that leads him darker, can see the rebellion forming, can see the final battle approaching, can see Arthur's death, and he can do nothing, can't warn anyone, can't intervene, can't even try to change the future he's seeing. He's trapped with perfect knowledge and zero power. The prophet who engineered a kingdom is forced to watch that kingdom fall apart exactly as he predicted it would. Is this justice? Is this what he deserves? If you believe Merlin was a monster, that he orchestrated Igraine's rape, stole Arthur, manipulated an entire kingdom for his own purposes, then yes, this is perfect punishment. The manipulator is rendered unable to manipulate. The controller is stripped of all control. The man who played God is reminded that he's mortal and powerless. If you believe Merlin was trying to help, that he genuinely wanted to save Britain, that his methods were harsh, but his intentions were good, then this is tragedy. The one person who might have prevented Camelot's fall is removed at exactly the moment he's most needed. Or maybe it's both. Maybe that's the point. Some versions hint that Merlin could escape if he wanted to, that Nimue's spell wasn't actually strong enough to hold him forever, that his own power could break through if he chose to use it. But he doesn't, because of three possible reasons. First possibility, he's too tired. He's spent decades serving kings, shaping destinies, carrying the weight of the future. The prison is terrible, but at least it's not his responsibility anymore. At least he can't be blamed for what happens next. Second possibility, he knows that escaping would make things worse, that his presence, his manipulations, his attempts to control outcomes, all of that was actually causing more problems than it solved. That Britain is better off without him, even if Britain doesn't know it. Third possibility, this was always part of his plan, that he's his father's son, that he engineered Camelot specifically to watch it fall, and that the prison is the perfect seat from which to observe his greatest work, the destruction of Britain's golden age, the tragedy he's been building toward all along. We don't know which. The texts don't tell us. They just say he's there, in his prison, watching, still seeing everything, still powerless, still waiting. The years pass. Arthur's reign continues, but cracks are appearing. Merlin sees them all from his prison, sees them forming, spreading, deepening. Lancelot and Guinevere's affair becomes public. Arthur is forced to acknowledge it, to punish them. Lancelot flees, takes knights with him, the Round Table fragments. Mordred sees his opportunity, spreads rumors, gathers supporters, claims Arthur is a false king, a tyrant, a failure. Claims that he himself should rule, that his blood, Arthur's blood, gives him the right. Arthur has to respond, has to fight, has to face his own son in battle. And Merlin, wherever he is, sees it all building, sees the armies gathering, sees the field at Camelot where it will all end, sees Arthur's death approaching. Can he feel anything at this point? After years in prison, after decades of manipulation and control and power, does he feel guilt, pride, satisfaction, grief? Or is he just numb, just watching the story play out the way he always knew it would? The armies meet, Arthur's forces against Mordred's, British against British, kingdom against kingdom, father against son. The battle is brutal. Thousands die. Knights of the Round Table, men Merlin knew, men he helped train, men who represented the Golden Age, cutting each other down. Toward the end of the day, Arthur and Mordred face each other directly. King and rebel, father and son, the beginning and the end. They fight. Arthur is older, tired, wounded from earlier in the battle. Mordred is young, furious, driven by hate and ambition. Arthur runs Mordred through with his spear, a killing blow. But as he does, Mordred pulls himself forward along the spear shaft, getting close enough to strike one final blow. His sword catches Arthur in the head, slashes through helmet and bone, a mortal wound. They fall together, father and son, king and rebel, both dying, both destroyed, does Merlin watch this? Can he see it from his prison? The texts don't say. But they do say that Arthur was taken away by mysterious women, that he was carried off to Avalon, an island of healing, to recover from his wounds. Some say he died there. Some say he's still there, sleeping, waiting to return when Britain needs him most. Some say the women were sent by Nimue, the Lady of the Lake, using her power to save what could be saved from the wreckage of Merlin's manipulations. And Merlin, still in his prison, still watching, still waiting, having seen everything he predicted come true, having watched his golden age collapse into tragedy, having engineered a king who became legend but couldn't escape the doom that Merlin himself might have created. The medieval texts end with Merlin still trapped. They don't give him a release. Don't let him die. Don't let him escape. He's just there forever, which forces us to ask, what was the point? What was Merlin's plan? What was he trying to achieve? The madman in the forest, Myrddin, saw the future and ran from it, couldn't bear to watch, chose isolation over knowledge. The monster, Geoffrey and de Boron's Merlin, saw the future and engineered it, orchestrated Arthur's birth, his rise, his reign, controlled everything. The fool, Malory's Merlin, saw the future and was trapped by it, rendered powerless at the crucial moment, forced to watch everything fall apart. Are these the same person? Number. They're three different Merlins created by three different eras to serve three different purposes. But they all end the same way, removed from the story, silenced, watching. The prophet who can't prevent, the architect who can't maintain, the teacher who gets trapped by his own lessons. Maybe that's the real truth about Merlin. Not that he was wise or evil, not that he saved Britain or doomed it, but that knowledge is a trap, that seeing the future doesn't give you power over it, that even the greatest manipulation eventually fails, that you can spend your whole life trying to control destiny, and in the end, destiny will happen anyway, and all you can do is watch. We've told you 3 stories, 3 different Merlins, each from a different century, each serving a different purpose. Now let's talk about what they mean, about why each generation needed a different wizard, about what these stories tell us, not about the past, but about the people telling them. The first Merlin, Myrddin Wyllt, the wild prophet of Camelot forest, comes from 6th century legends recorded in 9th to 12th century Welsh poems. This is a story about trauma, about soldiers who can't come back from war, about people who see too much and can't unsee it. The Welsh kingdoms in the 6th century were constantly at war. Rome had fallen. Britain was fragmenting. Battles like Arfderydd happened regularly. Young men went to fight and came back broken, or didn't come back at all. The people telling these stories understood what battle did to the mind. They'd seen it, lived it, buried the victims of it. Myrddin in the forest isn't insane. He's traumatized. The forest isn't a prison. It's the only place he feels safe. The prophecies aren't magic. They're a coping mechanism. His mind trying to impose order on chaos by pretending he can predict what's coming. This Merlin speaks to every veteran who can't reintegrate into civilian society, every refugee who can't forget what they saw, every survivor who can't move on from their trauma. He's the part of us that knows that sometimes seeing clearly means you can't function in a world that demands you pretend everything's fine. The Welsh didn't mock Myrddin for running to the forest. They understood, and they kept his story alive because it gave voice to something real. that knowing the truth doesn't always help, that sometimes insight is a curse, that sometimes the wisest thing you can do is remove yourself from a situation you can't fix. This is the honest Merlin, the one who admits that prophecy is torture, that seeing the future means watching people ignore your warnings and march toward disaster anyway. And maybe that's why he disappeared from the mainstream story. Because the later writers needed a wizard who could do more than predict. They needed one who could control. The second Merlin, Geoffrey of Monmouth's Merlin, enhanced by Robert de Boron, was created in the 12th and 13th centuries during England's most turbulent period. Geoffrey wrote during the Anarchy, 1135 to 1153, a civil war over the English throne. The country was tearing itself apart. People needed to believe in legitimate authority, needed a story that explained where power comes from and who deserves it. So Geoffrey created a wizard who could engineer kings, who could prove legitimacy through miracles, who could make destiny look like divine will instead of political manipulation. Merlin became propaganda, a tool for justifying conquest and control, need to legitimize Norman rule over Britain. Tell a story about a wizard who arranged it all centuries ago. Need to explain why one family should rule instead of another. Show that Merlin chose them specifically. Robert de Boron added the demon origin during the Crusades, when the church needed stories showing that even evil could be redeemed through Christianity. Merlin became proof that baptism works, that faith conquers blood, that the church's power was absolute. But here's what's fascinating. Geoffrey and de Boron couldn't completely hide what Merlin actually does in these stories. He orchestrates a rape, he steals a baby, he manipulates an entire kingdom. He engineers outcomes through deception and control. They're trying to present him as a wise advisor, but if you read carefully, he's a monster, a demon's son who acts like a demon despite his baptism. And that tells us something about the people writing these stories. They understood that power requires manipulation, that kings don't rise through divine right. They rise through calculated moves by people behind the scenes, that the stories we tell about authority are always lies, designed to make control look like destiny. Merlin the monster speaks to our suspicion of power, our fear that the people in charge don't actually serve our interests, our worry that history is shaped by manipulators who see us as pieces on a board. He's every conspiracy theory about puppet masters and hidden agendas, every suspicion that the official story is covering up something darker. Every fear that the people with power got it through means they're not telling us about. The medieval writers tried to make him heroic, but they couldn't hide what he was, someone who decided he knew better than everyone else, who manipulated outcomes to match his vision, who treated people as tools instead of humans. And we keep telling this version of Merlin because we need to believe that someone's in control, even if that someone is monstrous, even if that control is built on lies. Because the alternative, that history is chaos, that no one's really driving, that outcomes are random, is more terrifying than conspiracy. The third Merlin, the one trapped by Nimue from the Vulgate cycle and Malory, was written in the 13th to 15th centuries during the late Middle Ages. This was when universities were forming, when literacy was spreading, when knowledge was starting to be democratized, when students were beginning to surpass their teachers, and when people were starting to ask, what's the cost of knowledge? What do you lose when you learn too much? Malory wrote his version in prison in 1469 to 1470. He understood what it meant to be trapped, to see disaster coming and be powerless to prevent it, to have knowledge but no ability to use it. This Merlin speaks to the tragedy of expertise, the specialist who sees problems no one else can see and gets ignored. The teacher who trains someone better than themselves and becomes obsolete. The parent whose child surpasses them. The mentor who realizes they're no longer needed. He's about the fundamental loneliness of being the smartest person in the room. About how intelligence isolates. About how the more you know, the more you realize how little control you actually have. This version emerges during a time when medieval society was grappling with rapid change. The printing press would arrive within a generation. The Renaissance was beginning. The old certainties were crumbling. People who'd been trained in one world were watching a completely different world emerge. And Merlin's story gave them a framework for understanding that anxiety. What if all your knowledge becomes worthless? What if the person you trained uses what you taught them to replace you? What if the future you helped create has no place for you in it? The Nimue story is especially telling because different manuscripts can't agree on whether she's villain or hero. That ambiguity is intentional because the question isn't whether Nimue was right or wrong to trap Merlin. The question is, when the student surpasses the teacher, when the next generation has all the knowledge of the previous generation plus new knowledge the elders don't have, what happens to the elders? Are they honored for their teaching, or are they sealed away, considered irrelevant, left to watch the world change without them? Merlin in the Crystal Cave is every aging expert watching their field evolve beyond their understanding. Every professor whose students go on to make discoveries they never imagined. Every artist whose protege surpasses them. It's the inevitable tragedy of teaching. If you do it right, you become obsolete. And maybe that's actually what wisdom looks like. Teaching someone everything you know, even knowing they'll use it to move beyond you, even knowing you'll be left behind. This Merlin is the most human of the three, not because he's the kindest or the most sympathetic, but because he experiences the most relatable fear that everything you've built, everything you know, everything you are, it won't matter. The world will move on without you, and all you can do is watch. So why do we keep all three versions? Why hasn't one Merlin replaced the others? Why do we keep seeing different interpretations? BBC's Merlin, Disney's Merlin, Marion Zimmer, Bradley's Merlin, T.H. White's Merlin. Who lives backwards through time? Because we need all three. We need them for different things. We need the madman when we're traumatized, when we've seen too much and can't function, when the world demands we pretend everything's fine, but we know it's not, when we need permission to step away, to remove ourselves, to say, I can't bear this anymore. We need the monster when we're suspicious of power, when we see corruption and manipulation and wonder how deep it goes, when we need to believe that someone's driving, even if that someone is evil, when conspiracy makes more sense than chaos. We need the fool when we're facing obsolescence, when we realize our knowledge has limits, when the next generation is surpassing us, when we need a story that says being replaced is part of the cycle. It's supposed to happen. It doesn't mean you failed. Each Merlin serves a different psychological need, and we keep rewriting him because each generation has different needs. But through all the versions, through 1,400 years of rewrites and reimaginings, one thing stays constant. Merlin sees the future, and seeing the future doesn't give him the power to change it. That's the core of every version. The madman sees Britain falling and can't stop it. The monster engineers a golden age and can't maintain it. The fool sees Camelot's doom and is trapped, unable to prevent it. The wizard with ultimate knowledge has no control over outcomes. Why does this theme persist? Why do we keep coming back to this specific tragedy? Because it's true, not historically true, emotionally true. We live in a world where we can see disasters coming, climate change, political instability, economic inequality, technological disruption, pandemics. We have more information than any previous generation, more data, more expertise, more ability to predict what's coming, and we're mostly helpless to stop it. We are all Merlin, watching the future approach, knowing what's coming, trying to warn people, getting ignored, watching it happen anyway. That's why the story survives. That's why we keep rewriting it. That's why every generation needs their own version. Because Merlin isn't a historical figure. He's a mirror. He's us. The person who sees clearly, who tries to warn, who gets dismissed as mad or manipulative or irrelevant, who watches the disaster unfold exactly as predicted, and who has to live with the knowledge that being right doesn't mean you can change anything. So, 3 stories, 3 Merlins, 1400 years of rewrites. Let's cut through it. Was there a real Merlin? Number: absolutely not. There was probably a bard named Myrddin who lost his mind after the Battle of Arfderydd. There was definitely a Romano-British general named Ambrosius Aurelianus. But Merlin, the wizard? Merlin, the advisor to King Arthur? That guy was invented by Geoffrey of Monmouth in 1136 to make the Norman conquest look like destiny instead of theft. He wrote historical fiction, claimed it was real history, and people believed it for centuries. Everything else got piled on top. The Demon Father? Added by a French poet in 1200. The Sword in the Stone? Added by French monks in the 1220s. Nimue sealing him away? Added in the 1230s. Malory just took all the French versions and made them English. Merlin is 900 years of telephone game played by monks with political agendas. But the story survives because it's useful. Each version served a specific purpose. The Welsh Madman worked because 6th century Britain was constantly at war. People understood trauma. Myrddin gave them a story that made PTSD look like prophecy. Geoffrey's monster worked because 12th century England needed to believe in legitimate authority during a civil war. A wizard who could prove kingship through miracles justified power without admitting it was just conquest. The fool trapped by his student worked because late medieval Europe was watching experts become obsolete. Universities were forming, students were surpassing teachers. The story made that transition feel mythic instead of just depressing. Each version helped people make sense of their moment in history. That's why it kept getting rewritten. Not deep philosophy, just usefulness. Here's what stays consistent. Merlin always gets removed from the story before Arthur falls. The madman walks into the forest. The monster gets sealed in a cave. The fool gets trapped by his student. Every version removes Merlin before Camelot's end. Why? Story structure. If Merlin stayed, he'd either prevent the tragedy, which ruins the ending, or cause it, which makes Arthur look like a puppet. So they wrote him out. Every version finds a different way to do it. That's not mystical. That's just how narrative works. If there was a real Myrddin who went mad after Arfderydd, he probably died in the forest. No magic, just exposure or starvation. That's what happened to mad people in the 6th century. Ambrosius Aurelianus died sometime in the late 5th century. We don't know how or where. He gets mentioned once and disappears from history. Geoffrey's Merlin never existed outside Geoffrey's book, and there was no magical imprisonment because there was no magic. The real Merlin was probably a traumatized veteran who died forgotten. Then 400 years later, people started telling stories. Then 500 years after that, a monk used those stories for propaganda. Then everyone else piled on. That's not mystical. That's just how legends work. Why are we still talking about Merlin in 2025? Because the story has good bones. It's adaptable. You can make Merlin mean almost anything. The Victorians made him a wise, moral teacher. The 1960s made him a hippie wizard with time quirks. The 2000s made him Arthur's best friend and equal. What will the 2020s make him? Probably something about misinformation, or AI that predicts everything but controls nothing, or expertise being dismissed for conspiracy theories. The story adapts, not because Merlin is eternal, but because he's a useful narrative tool. Here's what Merlin's story actually did. It gave medieval writers a way to explain Arthur's kingship without admitting it was just violence and politics. A wizard chose him sounds better than he won through conquest. It gave Britain a mythology to compete with French and German epics. It gave generations of writers a character they could use to comment on power, knowledge, and obsolescence without inventing something from scratch. That's the real legacy, not wisdom or warnings, just a really useful character who keeps getting repurposed. Was there a real Merlin? No. Did the stories mean something to the people telling them? Yes. Are those stories true in some deep sense? Number. They're just stories that were useful at specific times. Should you learn something from them? Sure, if you want. They show you how propaganda works, how legends form, how each era rewrites the past to serve the present. But you don't need to. You can just appreciate them as 900 years of collaborative fiction that somehow produce compelling narratives, even though they're completely made up. The medieval texts leave Merlin in prison forever because they needed him out of the story, but didn't want to kill him. He's gone, but not dead. Let's future writers bring him back. It's the medieval equivalent of somehow Palpatine returned. The Welsh texts leave Myrddin in the forest still prophesying because it let them explain why Britain kept losing wars. Our prophet warned us and we didn't listen is better than we just kept losing. Every version leaves Merlin in a position where he could theoretically return, but probably won't. That's intentional. It's a narrative trick, not a mystery. So where is Merlin now? Nowhere. He never existed. The stories exist. The character exists. But Merlin the person never was. And honestly, that's fine. We don't need a real Merlin. We never did. We just needed the stories. If you made it this far, thank you. This is what we do at the Midnight Archives. We take the stories you think you know and show you what they actually were. We dig up the dark history buried under legend. We show you how the past got rewritten to serve the present. If you want more deep dives into legends that aren't what you thought, more dark history that's been deliberately obscured, subscribe, like the video. Tell us in the comments what legend you want us to dismantle next. Because here's the thing about mythology. Once you see how it's constructed, once you understand why each version was written and who it served, you can never look at these stories the same way again. And maybe that's the only real magic Merlin ever performed. Not prophecy, not transformation, not engineering kings, just making people believe in stories so hard they forgot they were made up. That's it. That's the trick. We fell for it for 900 years. Now you know better. The wizard in the forest isn't real. The demon's son was propaganda. The fool in the cave was a plot device. They're all just stories. Really good stories that we keep telling because they work. But stories nonetheless. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. And remember, question everything, especially the legends. They're usually lying.